Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're decoding the ultimate biological instruction manual that makes you, well, exactly who you are. Have you ever wondered why you might have your mother's eyes but your grandfather's nose? It all comes down to a really fascinating microscopic world hidden right inside your cells. So let's just dive right in.
Before we get into the heavy science, just think about it for a second. Why do you actually look like your parents? Why is like begets like such a universal truth? I mean, cats make cats, dogs make dogs, right? A mango seed is never going to sprout into a pine tree. So what are the invisible laws actually governing all of this?
Here's our game plan for today. 1. The father of genetics. 2. Chromosomes, genes, and sex. 3. Dominant and recessive traits. 4. Predicting genetic inheritance. 5. Mendel's 3 great laws. And finally 6. When the blueprint changes. Okay, Section 1. The father of genetics. Unlocking nature's secrets. This is Gregor J. Mendel. And honestly, it's wild because he wasn't even trying to revolutionize biology. He was an Austrian monk in the mid-19th century, just breeding everyday garden peas out of pure curiosity. Fun fact, he actually failed his teaching certificate exam. But his absolute obsession with understanding nature turned him into the ultimate teacher of teachers. Just by carefully observing his garden, he became literally the first person to crack the fundamental laws of heredity.
Moving on to Section 2, chromosomes, genes, and sex, the cellular hardware.
To really get what Mendel was seeing with those peas, we have to look at the cellular hardware. And that brings us to a magic number, 46. Every standard cell in your body has exactly 46 chromosomes. Because they always pair up, you've got 23 perfect pairs. You inherited one full set of 23 from your mom and the matching set of 23 from your dad. Simple as that.
Now, if we take super high-power microscopic photos of these chromosomes right as a cell is dividing and carefully line them up by their size and shape, we get what biologists call a karyotype.
This is a human karyotype in action. It's basically a genetic lineup. Look at how perfectly matched the pairs from 1 to 22 are. But look closely down at that 23rd pair. See how different they are? That depends entirely on whether we're looking at a female or a male. Females have 2 similar large X chromosomes. Males, they have a mismatched pair, one X and a tiny little Y chromosome.
So here's the absolutely crucial distinction. Those first 22 pairs, they're called autosomes. They dictate your physical body features. You know, your height, your complexion, all of that. But that final 23rd pair are your sex chromosomes, and they basically have one primary job, strictly determining biological sex. All right, Section 3, dominant and recessive traits, reading the instruction manual.
We've got the hardware down, so let's check out the software. Take a quick personal inventory for a second. Can you roll your tongue into a U shape? Go check a mirror later. Are your earlobes free hanging, or are they attached straight to the side of your head? These inherited features are what we call characters, and the specific variations like brown eyes versus blue eyes, those are your specific traits.
Now, your traits are driven by genes. But remember, since you have 2 sets of chromosomes, you actually have 2 copies of every gene, one from each parent. These alternative forms are called alleles. Think of it like a hierarchy. If you inherit a dominant allele, it's the absolute boss. It's going to express itself and completely overpower the hidden, submissive version, which is your recessive allele. Which brings us to Section 4, predicting genetic inheritance, solving the puzzle. So, how exactly do these alleles mix? It's not magic. It's actually a super logical 3-step process using a Punnett square. You basically draw a grid. Step 1, put the mom's potential genetic contributions, her gametes, on one side. Step 2, put the dad's gametes on the other. Step 3, crisscross them into the boxes. Boom. That calculates the exact mathematical probability of their child's traits.
Let's look at a real-world family pedigree to see this in action. Take 2 parents who can both roll their tongues, right? But then they have a kid who can't. How does that happen? Well, both parents were secretly carrying the hidden recessive non-rolling allele. They were heterozygous. So they pass those hidden traits down, and without a dominant allele there to overrule it, the child ends up with a recessive trait. Makes perfect sense when you map it out.
Now let's level up to something a bit more complex, sex-linked traits.
This completely explains conditions like colorblindness. Because the defective gene for colorblindness is recessive and lives entirely on the X chromosome, the inheritance rules are totally different for men and women. If a guy inherits just one defective X chromosome from his mom, he'll be colorblind. Why? Because his Y chromosome doesn't have a matching gene to mask it. That's exactly why guys are way more likely to be colorblind than women.
All right, Section 5, Mendel's 3 Great Laws, the rules of the game.
All these Punnett square puzzles we just went through, they perfectly validate the rules Gregor Mendel figured out over a century ago. And keep in mind, he did this way before anyone even knew what DNA was. He painstakingly cross-pollinated pure-breeding pea plants, tracking really simple contrasting characters, like purple versus white flowers, or tall versus dwarf stems. He used the garden pea specifically because it had these super clear either-or variations that bred true every single generation. And when Mendel crossed hybrid plants, meaning plants carrying both a dominant and a recessive trait, he saw something amazing. He consistently got this exact mathematical ratio of 3:1 in the offspring. 3 parts showed the dominant trait, and 1 part showed the recessive trait. This was huge. It mathematically proved that recessive traits don't just vanish when they're mixed in. They're just hiding, waiting to pair up again. From thousands of these crosses, Mendel established his 3 great generalizations. Mendel's laws of inheritance. First, the law of dominance, which explains those bossy, super-ruling traits. Second, the law of segregation, showing how pairs separate when reproductive cells form. And third, the law of independent assortment, which basically says inheriting one trait doesn't dictate inheriting another. And remember, these aren't just rules for garden peas. These are the foundational rules for literally all living things. Finally, Section 6, when the blueprint changes, mutations and variations. So we've got this beautifully predictable system, right? Standard inheritance gives us highly predictable, mathematically sound ratios. But what happens when the instruction manual gets a typo? Nature isn't always perfectly stable. Sometimes it throws in completely sudden, unpredictable alterations to the code. These sudden changes are what we call mutations. A mutation is just an alteration in the hereditary material itself. They can happen totally naturally, or they can be triggered by external stuff like radiation. And sometimes a single typo in one tiny gene can cause severe genetic diseases. Take sickle cell anemia, for example, where a DNA change actually alters the entire shape of red blood cells. But that leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to wrap up the explainer today. We always talk about mutations causing inherited disorders, but aren't these exact same sudden changes the ultimate driver of human diversity? Think about it. Without these occasional accidental typos in our genetic code over thousands of generations, we simply wouldn't have the beautiful, endless variations that make every single person totally unique. It's wild to think about next time you look in the mirror. Anyway, thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the blueprint of life.